Hello and welcome to this episode of BariAftercare, the podcast, which I am titling Boundaries in General and with Food Pushers specifically. And how I came up with this is honestly thanks to Dr. Susan Mitchell. So shout out to Dr. Susan. Dr. Susan, if you're not familiar with her, I hope that you will become familiar with her, especially if you're a person who has opted to have bariatric surgery, because Dr. Susan is a PhD level dietitian who has worked in the field of bariatric medicine for years and years and years. This woman knows her stuff. She has her own podcast called Bariatric Surgery Success. And just last week, we did an episode, and I was honored to be part of that episode. There were 3 dietitians and myself, and we were talking about food pushers. And I thought this is such an important topic that I think I'll interrupt my schedule of podcast topics and talk about this to follow up with what Dr. Susan just put out, because it's so important and such a difficult topic for people to set boundaries with other people, especially those who are trying to push food on you or who may say with words that they're supporting you, but their actions in daily life don't support their words. So maybe they're bringing you treats that you would prefer not to have as you're changing your lifestyle and all kinds of different things. So we're going to talk about those things tonight, but I definitely want you to listen to the Bariatric Surgery Success podcast, especially, like I said, if you've had a surgical procedure or if you are planning to, because it's wonderful. I love peer support. We need peer support in our aftercare when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to mental health. You want to get your information from professionals. Yes, there are, your peers will give you this worked for me and that worked for me and that worked for me. And those are all good sources of information. But for the factual information, then I do recommend you go to the professionals. And Dr. Susan Mitchell is a top professional in the field of bariatric nutrition and dietetics. Is that the word? All right. So I am not at my best tonight. You can maybe hear it in my voice. And I say night because I'm recording this. It's dark. It's very cold out. It is January. And I went and played all weekend at Disney World, where there are a lot of people and a lot of germs. And I think I brought some of them home with me. So my voice is not nearly as strong. And I took a 2-hour nap this afternoon, and that helped. So I'm going to see if I can get through this. I have medicine head because I took the cold and cough medicine, so that hopefully I'm not coughing all over this microphone. Fortunately, even if I do, you can't catch my germs on the other side of whatever you're listening through. So welcome to the podcast. This is an important topic, and I'm going to broaden the topic, not just to food pushers, but setting boundaries in general, because so many people tell me that this is a very, very difficult thing for them to do. And in my typical fashion, I'm going to be very direct. I'm going to be very straightforward. And I'll probably veer off because there are a lot of things that have come up lately in conversations with people that I'll probably get into. And so just bear with me, knowing that the overall topic tonight is on learning to set boundaries. That's a you skill. That is something you have to do for you. And you have to do this for you in terms of setting boundaries, not only with other people, but you have to learn to set boundaries with yourself. So let's get into how do we do that? What are boundaries all about? I'll give a little brief introduction about that. Then we'll talk about the similarities between physical boundaries and emotional boundaries and the differences between those things and the reasons it's so important for you to learn to set boundaries. I know it's difficult, but if you are an adult, then we need to learn adult skills. If you want to live the life you dream of living, then you have to do some hard things on your own behalf. And setting boundaries is one of the hardest things that adults have to do. But if you want to have a productive life where you feel empowered, where you feel personally empowered, and I did a podcast episode some months back about personal power, which I would really encourage you to listen to, because it's important that we feel like we have a level of personal power, not being a bully, not being aggressive, but learning to be assertive and say yes and say no where it fits for you in your life today. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And usually when I prepare for the podcasts, I do a lot of reading. I go to different articles. I go to Psychology Today. I go to the research articles, Google Scholar. Not feeling well, was driving most of the day yesterday. So I'm using information primarily from my experience in working with patients for over 25 years, 20 of that spent in the bariatric community. And I'm going to be referencing a couple of different books, but primarily one that Laura Preston, who is, the organizer of the BariAftercare online program and a person who I have more gratitude than many other people in my life. She's just my right-hand woman, and I treasure her. But this book, she told me about this book. It's called The Book of Boundaries. Set the Limits That Will Set You Free. And it's by a woman named Melissa Urban. Love it, love it, love it. Another great book, and I'm not including a lot of it in tonight's talk, but I would really encourage you to get this one, and I'll link these books in the show notes. But it's called Boundaries. That's the topic. You'll know it's the right one because it's got a pencil drawn down the cover of it. And it is by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And there's a updated and expanded edition. So maybe you want to check into that one if you haven't purchased this book yet. And because in the BariAftercare online program, we are getting ready to have a webinar about the book, or a workshop about the book by Mel Robbins, The Let Them Theory. I have a quote by her, and I may be talking about more information from her book too, and I hope you will join us for that. It's going to be a really great topic, a great webinar. Anybody who's a book lover or knows of Mel Robbins is reading and talking about this book, and it's really got a lot of great information. I was doing some reading in it while we were driving down to Florida this weekend, and the book is written very straightforwardly. You don't need to have, you just have to be able to read to get it. It's not an intellectually written book. It's just straightforward and direct, and I love that about Mel Robbins. And she does have an ability and a skill to synthesize complex topics into information that everybody can understand and digest and incorporate into their daily life. And so at first, my thoughts were, God, this is so simplistic. But I have to remember that I've been a therapist for 30 years. So of course it's very simplistic to me. But I also said to my daughter who was in the car, I said, you know what? I honestly think everybody in the world should read this book. And the simplicity of it is one of the things that's going to make it palatable to every single person. But I truly think it's amazing information. So if you haven't signed up for that webinar, please do. The information is all over social media. But let's get back to the information for tonight's episode. And we'll do a quick overview of what boundaries are and the reasons it's important to set boundaries. And then we'll talk specifically from the book by Melissa Urban, The Book of Boundaries, because she has a fun, playful, but very serious way to address these issues. And so I'm going to use a lot of the information from her book. And I just really found this book to be very helpful because it gives you actual conversations. So you can look at those and go, okay, how can I tweak this to implement in my situation? All right, so there are emotional boundaries and there are physical boundaries. And it's easier for most people to visualize physical boundaries. And I'll talk about those in just a minute. But I want to tell you real quickly what an emotional boundary is. Like a physical boundary, an emotional boundary is a limit. And it's a limit that we set to protect our emotions, our thoughts, our feelings, our energy, our personhood, who we are, what we value. It's limits we set so people don't overstep and are too much into our business. And we can set these in any relationship. So it could be relationships at work that we set limits with. We can set limits with family members, personal friends, our partners, our children. And we'll talk about all those different kinds of limits and what's appropriate. And we also have to understand that just because we set a limit with a person or a boundary with a person, and we'll go into specific examples, doesn't mean they're going to honor those. So we have to go in with the understanding that we can always share with a person what we would like, what we expect from them, what we hope they would do to honor us. But we have to do it without expectation that just because we ask for it, they're going to automatically do it. Because some people won't. All right. But boundaries are important because they help to protect our feelings. An emotional boundary is there to say, you know what? I'm not comfortable talking to you about this. I'm not comfortable discussing that with you. I'm not comfortable having you ask me questions about this. It's too personal. And saying so. So the limit, the boundary is the saying so. And that's what trips people up, because it's difficult, especially for people who have felt insecure or been shamed or criticized by the people they love, the people in their life, the people who raised them, or maybe they were bullied by people, and so they're very timid and afraid. There are a lot of reasons that people are reluctant to set boundaries, and we'll talk about those and the importance of working through that or learning the skills to be able to do that. The other reason that setting boundaries is so important is because it helps you to maintain healthy relationships. A lot of times, if people are in a relationship, there's a person that seems to have more power in the relationship and a person that seems to have less power. Well, that may, there may be things that you have strengths, like maybe you're really good with finances in your marriage or your relationship. And so you kind of handle most of those. Maybe your partner's really good logistically and with planning. And so they handle details of vacations. And so you can have trade-offs as long as both people have the freedom to have information and opinions, and their feelings, their thoughts, their observations are respected and valued by the other person. Again, we'll get into more about that. But in a healthy relationship, it's critical that we're able to say to people when you're crossing a line, or when I'm feeling uncomfortable, or I'm feeling pushed, or I'm feeling embarrassed, or I'm feeling unheard, or I'm feeling dismissed. So in communication, we want to start with I feel, I think, I would appreciate, instead of you, blah, blah, blah. We will talk about that too. And I would like to refer you to the series of podcasts that I did, a while back, but there's a whole series of them on communication. I highly recommend everybody listen to those, because communication, while it's something that we do all the time, most of us did not learn really healthy communication skills. And so we're either very passive and we don't speak up for ourselves, and if you're a passive person and you don't speak up for yourself, setting boundaries is going to be a difficult task to learn. But it's important, it's critical, and if you want to have a sense of power and move your life in the direction where you want to move it, then this is a skill that would be worth your while to take some time to learn, practice, and get good at in a number of different arenas. And let me tell you something, setting boundaries is most difficult with our family members. And the reason for that is we have long and very often complicated emotional relationships with parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, grandparents, people who had influence over us as children. And depending on the nature of those relationships, it can be real tough to learn to set boundaries with those people. Again, a critical skill for becoming a healthier version of yourself, your healthiest version of your adultness. All right, so we protect ourselves by setting boundaries. We maintain healthy relationships because we clear the air. And I'm going to talk about that because here's where we get into trouble. And I'll give you an example of someone that I've worked with in the past. I'm going to tell you, in the past, the present, most days, several times, because we read into things. We make up our minds about what people meant or how they're feeling. We don't have a right to do that. We're going to talk about that because that interferes with our willingness to set boundaries. So in addition to protecting our feelings, maintaining healthy relationships, setting boundaries can help us regain stability in relationships because maybe there are people in your life you have not set healthy boundaries with in the past. And as you become more adult-like, as you become more confident, as you become more self-confident, whether you're in therapy or seeing a coach or just doing a lot of self-reflection and growing in whatever way works for you, because there are a lot of ways to roam. But my hope for you and the purpose of BariAftercare is to help you look at yourself and say, these are my strengths and how can I use those to have the kind of life that I want most in the world. And these are my areas of weakness. And the weakness may be because I was never taught, or it may be because I had bad experiences in certain areas that have prevented me from learning to have these healthy skills. Whatever the reason, my hope for you is that you will find ways to learn skills that you have deficits in. And if setting boundaries for yourself, speaking your truth, living your truth, sharing how you think, how you feel, what you would like in environments, if that is difficult for you, then I seriously hope you will listen to every word in this episode and then do some more learning on your own, because there's a lot of wonderful information out there about learning to set boundaries and ways that you can practice doing so. All right, so let me talk about visual boundaries because you will for sure get this. It's difficult when we talk about psychological concepts because there's nothing to really look at. Like if I say, imagine a tennis court and imagine the out of bounds lines at the back of the tennis court, or maybe you play pickleball, or maybe you played soccer or football or whatever kind of sport you may have played. There are usually courts and there are usually lines, and the lines indicate the boundaries. You're either inside the boundary or outside the boundary. So boundaries in sporting activities say, okay, play is good or play is not good. And that's a way to know who scores the point, in the boundary or outside of the boundary. Or if you lived in a home where you had a fence around your yard, that fence may have indicated the property line, the boundary lines of your property. Or maybe you had more property, but the fence was around the kids' play area. And so that area had boundaries. So the kids, when they were little, had to stay in the fenced-in area. Why? To keep them safe, to protect them, to maintain healthy relationships. In other words, they're not going to knock on the neighbor's door. The neighbors aren't coming into the backyard and hanging out with your kids without your permission. Boundaries to maintain healthy relationships and to protect your children, and to, maybe the kid finds a way out of the gate or the dog finds a way out of the gate, and then you currently my dog can get out my fence, and I figured out how. Okay, so that's a summer project. But to regain stability. So, okay, dog, I see how you're getting out of the yard. I'm going to have to put a second layer of protection, 2-layer identification, or whatever they call that with our passwords, right? So the same is true with physical boundaries as it is with emotional boundaries. The purpose is protection. Think about people who have toddlers and a 2 or 3 story house. In my home, when my kids were little, with my grandkids when they were little, we would have one of those gates at the bottom of the stairs and at the top of the stairs. So if you're upstairs, they can't fall down the stairs. If you're downstairs, they can't climb up the stairs, for their protection. And so I want you to think about, as we talk about setting boundaries, which for many people, like I said, is a very, very scary thing. Think about the fact that you would do this for your children or your nieces and nephews or somebody you loved. You would set boundaries for them to keep them safe and protected, especially a child, hopefully. And because there are some people who do not, as we know. But also, I want you to think for a minute about, and when I teach the Gain While You Lose class, I show some visual pictures. And the first picture is like a building that is boarded up. There are boards across all of the windows, which are shuttered, closed, and there are boards nailed, so there's no way to open those windows. There are nails and boards across the doors, so there's no way of getting in or out of this building. So imagine what that looks like. That is a visual example of very tight boundaries. Nothing's getting in, nothing's getting out. And when we talk about family systems, just to go down a little path here, a little bit of psychoeducation here for you, which I always love. If you grew up in a family where they're like, don't talk to anybody outside this house about what goes on in here. Don't be sharing our business with other people. Now, some of that's legit. But if it's like, don't you dare speak a word of what goes on in this house, maybe somebody needs to know what's going on in that house to protect children or whatever. But if there is a threat or danger of that, that's representative of a closed family system. In other words, the boundaries are too tight. That's not healthy. Just an FYI. So a boarded up house or a boarded up building has too tight of boundaries. If you come from a family that represents like that, that's not a healthy place to grow up. Conversely, if you grew up in like a thatched roof hut, maybe there's just this thatched roof, made out of sticks and whatever thatch is made out of, and it's tied together with strings, and there are 4 posts, but there's no walls. There's no, anybody can come and go whenever. Come under the roof, go as you please, come and go. There's no boundaries. That's kind of like growing up in a family where there's no boundaries. It's like kids have no rules. There are no curfews. People can spend the night. There's no limits. There are no boundaries. That is equally unhealthy, because children in particular need boundaries. They need some limits, or they're not going to know how to feel safe, and children need to feel safe. So if you grew up in a super closed off, too many boundaries, you may be very reluctant to talk about anything. Maybe bad things went on in that home and you're terrified to talk about it because you were threatened if you say anything to anybody else about what's going on in here. So maybe it's hard for you to tell anybody about how you really think or what you really feel or what happened in your life, because that childhood fear of a threat looms over you and kicks into gear. If you were raised in a house where like there were no limits, you probably have no idea how to set healthy limits for your own children, or you don't understand why you can't do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. You can come and go at work. You don't have to punch a time clock. Maybe your work requires that. So it may be difficult for you to settle into an adult life where there are boundaries required of you if you had none as a child. A healthy home, imagine a house that has beautiful doors, beautiful windows. They open, they close. There are locks. Maybe there's a really nice white picket fence or some kind of fence that has a gate that opens and closes. The homeowners there can open the gates to let the people they want in. They open the doors to the people they want to come into their homes. They open the windows on a beautiful day and they close the windows when they don't want inclement weather coming in. That is a healthy family. Like, there are things that nobody needs to know about, not if they're unhealthy and horrible and bad and hurting people. Somebody needs to know about that, especially if there are children involved. But, it's like we don't want all of your friends spending the night every weekend. So we're going to say no sometimes. Yes, you can go to this event. No, you can't go to that one. And the reason is we feel that's inappropriate for your age group, whatever it is. But there are limits and there are boundaries for your protection, for your emotional stability, to maintain healthy relationships. So boundaries are a good thing when they're used appropriately. So we're going to talk about appropriate boundary setting for you because some people don't know. It's like, I literally remember, good Lord, this just came to me. I remember sitting in group therapy when I was in my late 20s or early 30s, and I don't remember what the topic was, but I literally remember thinking, you mean I can do that? I was like, and it was in regard to saying no to something. I was like, I had no idea I could do that. And here's an example of my own young life. I was sharing this with my grandkids, the older one, the other day, because he was asking some questions, and my daughter was there. And when I was young and had my kids, I was really young. I was 23 and 25. I had all three of the kids by 25. And my husband and I were fresh out of college. I opted not to work at that time because it cost more money to pay a babysitter for 3 infant/toddlers than it did for me to work. And I had a, quote, friend who lived around the corner, and she would literally introduce me to people. She was a nurse. And she worked, and she didn't have any kids or anything, but she would introduce me as her poor friend. Now, that was humiliating, but at that time, my self-esteem wasn't high enough, nor did I believe I had the right to say to her in private, I would appreciate if you didn't refer to me as your poor friend when you introduce me to people. Because A, it's dismissive, it's embarrassing, which is a me issue, but it's inappropriate. So I didn't have the skills or the self-esteem at that time in my life to do that. And so in the group therapy, I started learning these skills. So if you didn't learn them anywhere, and this is one of the reasons it's difficult for people to set boundaries, maybe they didn't have an example of how to do that. Or maybe you grew up in an environment where if you had an opinion, it wasn't welcome. Children are to be seen and not heard. Or maybe you had an opinion and it was shut down and you were dismissed. And when that happens to you over and over again, especially when you're a child, you learn not to speak up anymore. So there are many reasons. It could be self-esteem related. It could be something that was, taught out of you. In other words, I learned I better keep my mouth shut. It's just safer that way. There are some people just haven't been taught. A lot of reasons why we might not speak up. And it would be wise of you to develop some insight, like what makes it difficult for me to stand up for myself? What makes it difficult for me to speak up on my own behalf? And I would encourage you to do that with a therapist because it's often layered. And a lot of people will come up with what I refer to as a surface response. Well, I just don't like to hurt people's feelings. I don't say anything because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. While that may be true, chances are there are layers and layers and layers and layers below that that are probably more true, that have something to do with you, as opposed to letting it set easier with you by saying, I don't like to hurt other people's feelings, when the truth is probably somewhere along the lines of, it scares me to stand up for myself. I don't feel worthy of having an opinion. I never felt important enough to say something. I didn't think what I said mattered. Nobody ever took me seriously. So I believe there are layers. And in Mel Robbins' book, Let Them, she talks about going down those layers. And she's talking about this in the chapters on relationships and let them. And this is really, really critical, because until you decide, and this goes back to the episode a few weeks ago on learning to love yourself and learning to value and appreciate yourself. Because if we don't value and appreciate ourselves, it's going to be even more difficult to stand up and say, listen, I would appreciate if you would quit talking to me about that. I would appreciate if you wouldn't refer to me as your poor friend. I would appreciate if you would quit bringing me foods that I didn't ask you for and are triggers for me. I would appreciate if you would stay out of the middle of my relationship with my partner. So if you don't feel like you value yourself, or if you don't value yourself, it's going to be very difficult. And then you add to that, you may never have learned, or you add to that, you may have been dismissed had you ever tried to. So there are layers and layers and layers of reasons why it's difficult. One of the biggest ones is I always wanted my mom's approval, or I always wanted my dad's approval. And if I should set a boundary with them, they're going to come back with me what they always did. They're going to criticize me. They're going to pick on me. They're going to dismiss what I have to say. And that's too hurtful for me. Well, that's when you work through the issue with a therapist about how that hurt you in the past. And then you learn the skills to stand up for yourself as an adult. And if they criticize you, let them, because it's about them, not you. And that leads to another side note, which is you have to learn to not take things so personally, like they say in the 4 agreements. Another thing people have to learn is not to make up stories about what other people are thinking. I will give you an example of that in just a little minute. So think about boundaries as safety nets. Think about boundaries as a way to establish and maintain healthy relationships, and as ways to get back to a healthy relationship if you should go astray. All right. When it comes to food, which we'll get to in just a little bit, if you have made a lifestyle change, which may or may not include bariatric surgery, may or may not include GLP-1s, may or may not include having lost weight at all. Maybe you're just making lifestyle changes where you've decided you're going to be a vegetarian, or maybe you decided you're going to be a pescatarian, or maybe you decided, maybe you learned have a gluten allergy, or maybe you learned that, whatever it is, you're going to need to learn to set boundaries with other people, because you don't want them pushing their agendas on you or saying you don't eat enough or I'm worried about your health or I need blah, 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 blah. It hurts my feelings if you don't eat my whatever. You need to learn to stand up for yourself so that you live according to your own values. In the Gain While You Lose class that I teach, I talk about meaningful matters. And meaningful matters are your values. What matters to me most in the area of my relationship with food? What matters to me most in the areas of my health? What matters to me most in the area of my romantic relationship? What matters to me most in my relationship with friends, children, work, associates? So we can have meaningful matters or values. What means the most to me, what matters the most to me. Meaningful matters. And then we base our decisions against those things. So if having work-life balance is important to you and you're offered overtime, being able to say no, which is an example of setting a boundary, is going to be an important skill to learn so that you can live according to, no, when I leave work, I'm done with work. Or in your relationship with friends, if they want to go snow skiing and you really hate it, but you don't want to feel left out, learning to say no, rather than go against your own values and put yourself in a situation where you're miserable or don't feel safe or whatever it is. And when it comes to food, whatever your circumstances are, whether it's people are pushing food on you because they think you've lost too much weight, or their feelings are hurt because you won't eat just a little bit of that, or you're worried about not being part of the group because what they do is go out and eat all the time, or you're worried that you're going to offend somebody, or they're, thinking, you don't eat enough, or you've lost too much weight, or whatever their concerns are. Learning to say no to the people who are pushing their agenda, their food, their desire for you to eat for their own reasons on you. That's important. And another important thing is learning to set boundaries with yourself, which I think is equally important. And what I mean by that is learning to say no to yourself. Yes, I want that cookie. No, I'm not going to have it. Just like you would with a young child. You might say, sure, you can have this cookie after lunch, or sure, you can have, this whatever in the afternoon, but hopefully you're not going to say yes to all the sugar they want to eat all day, every day. Hopefully you're going to set limits for those children to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, to keep them not from bouncing off the walls, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can you do that with yourself? Well, I hope you're learning to, because you have to be able to say no and set boundaries with yourself if you're going to maintain weight loss and live according to your meaningful matters. So, boundaries are important, and you are the only one that can do them. So, if you want to respect yourself, it's important to act respectable. I had a conversation with a woman very recently, and it very much reminded me of myself and of my husband. My husband is a people pleaser. My husband wanted, and still does, but in our early marriage, he wanted to make me happy in every area of life, so much so that he wouldn't speak his mind. He wouldn't say, I'd rather not go here. I would rather you didn't go there. I would rather, you helped me with this. I would rather, whatever it would be, he would not stand up to me at all. And I don't even mean stand up to me like in an aggressive way. I mean, he wouldn't tell me anything that he liked, that he preferred, what his boundaries were, nothing. And here's what happened with that. I started to not respect him, because when somebody doesn't set boundaries for themselves, it's not very respectable. And it's not respectable because they're not respecting themselves. And human nature, unfortunately, if you're not respecting you and I'm wanting what I want when I want it, I'm not going to respect you either. In fact, I'm going to walk all over you. And that's one of the things that happened in my early marriage. And that's one of the things that was happening with a patient that not a patient, many patients, but one that I've been working with recently. And the person who's sort of taking advantage of the other person knows it. They know it. And part of them wants it that way because I wanted to have control. I wanted to be in charge because I was so feeling out of control in my life that I wanted to have control. But the other part of me wanted him to say, you know what? That is not okay, Connie. I'm not going to sit here while you talk to me that way. No, I'm not going to do this and this and this and this and this while you go play. No, I'm not going to take care of all the things all the time. So in our therapy, he had to learn to start setting boundaries with me and setting boundaries for himself. And what he had to learn was to set the boundaries. I couldn't do that for him. Now, I was either going to respect those boundaries or not respect those boundaries. And because I valued our marriage and because I wanted to learn, I wanted to respect him. But it's hard to respect somebody who's not respecting themselves. So as he learned to set boundaries with me, my respect for him grew, as did his respect for himself. And we grew closer and closer and closer that way. So setting boundaries is more likely to earn you respect from the people in your life than it is to push them away. Now, it is going to change the dynamic. So if your mama tends to make rules for you, or if your mama thinks she can say anything she wants to about your life, your marriage, your parenting, your whatever, and you don't want it, but you allow it, it's a you problem. Because you are not saying, I would appreciate you not saying that to me. I'm not going to stick around and have this conversation with you. If you're going to talk to me about that thing, I'm going to go home. So that becomes a you problem. And I know a lot of you are gulping because it's like, crap, I can't say no to my mother. Well, that's because your mother is dominating the relationship, or your father, or your friend, or your girlfriend, or your boyfriend, or your partner, or your child. Nobody can set the boundary for you. And this is the Mel Robbins thing. Again, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming to get you up and take you out for a walk. Nobody's coming to help you say no when you need to say no. Nobody's going to set boundaries for you. You need to learn the skill yourself as an adult, which means you need to overcome, work through whatever those layers are that are preventing you or making it frightening for you to do that. And it's a critical life skill if you want to be a healthy adult. If you want your parents to back off and get out of the middle of your relationship. If you want your people to quit pushing food on you. If you want them to quit commenting on your body size, your weight, your food intake, your lack of food intake, the kind of food you're choosing to eat, the whatever it happens to be. Nobody's coming to do this for you. So you're going to have to learn the skills yourself. And you're going to have to, I know I'm being redundant, but you're going to have to learn what it is that prevents you, what makes it scary for you, what makes it hard for you. And I will promise you it goes beyond, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. While that may be true, there are other reasons. All right, so Mel Robbins in her book, The Let Them Theory, says, being able to have honest conversations is the foundation of a loving and healthy relationship. I'm going to repeat that because it is 100% accurate, 100% the truth. Being able to have honest conversations is the foundation of a loving and healthy relationship. So if you're in a relationship and you love your partner and they love you, but it's hard for you to talk about intimacy or sex or finances or the kids or parenting or his parents or her parents or your parents or their parents or whatever it is. If it's difficult for you, if you are unwilling to learn the skill, because you might say, I'm not capable. Yes, you are. If you are an adult and you maintain a job and you, whatever, you're capable. You just might be afraid. You just might be unwilling. You've got to be willing to have healthy, honest relationships, but you've got to learn how to do it without pushing the other person away. Because most of us, our communication sucks, and what we do is we push buttons, and then the other person is defensive, and then they push buttons, and now we're defensive, and now we're back to the same fight we've had 15 times. My husband and I swear to God, I could tell you what the order of the fight would be and where it would get and who would say what and who would respond and how they would respond, and we would have the same fight for 15 years. No matter where it started, it would end up the same way until one of us, whichever one of us, decided we were going to change the dance steps. And when one of us changed the dance steps, and sometimes it was him and sometimes it was me, who was ever in a better mental space or headspace at that time, is the one who would change the dance steps. First, we had to learn a new dance because you always do what you always did, and then you're always going to do what you always got. So if you don't know anything but to shoot shots at the other one's vulnerable spots, you're going to get defensiveness from them, and then you're going to go into your defense and they're going to come into their attack, and vice versa. Now we've got an attack and a defense. And that's why a lot of relationships fail, because we don't know how to communicate. Side story. Okay, so we got to learn the skills so that you can have the honest conversations. And I will tell you this personally, the last person I wanted any feedback from for the longest time was my husband. And that was because, and him from me too, this went both ways, because we both came at whatever issues from our own agenda. And so one of the things that we absolutely had to learn to do was to look at the situation from the other person's perspective. That was a game changer. That takes a lot of willingness. I am willing to look at that from their perspective. And as much as it doesn't make sense to me, knowing my husband the way I know him after being married to him for 40 some years, I'm like, okay, this is typically his thought pattern. He's logical, he's analytical, he's so different than me. And I only think my way, he only thinks his way. So if I look at it from how he's explaining it, I guess I can see how he came up with that conclusion, which is not at all my intent. So being willing to look at it from their perspective and say, okay, if I'm understanding this, this is what you're hearing. It seems this is where you're going with this. And so it makes sense that that would be your conclusion. Let me help you understand where I'm coming from on this. So both parties have to be willing. Okay, it takes two really mature, willing people to do that, to have that conversation, to listen to each other without your own issues getting in the way. And because, as Mel Robbins says in her book, everybody's behaving like 8-year-olds emotionally. That makes it tough to have healthy relationships as adults. Doesn't matter if it's friendships, doesn't matter if it's romantic relationships. It's tough because a lot of us are just plain ill-equipped, or we are, our self-esteem is so low, or we have so much fear. It's no wonder, right? That relationships are so difficult. So learning to set boundaries as a post-op or as a person who has lost a lot of weight is really important. And it's not just with the food, but it's in any relationship. You have to be willing to say, and to learn to say in an appropriate way, the honest things that you need to say. So the communication skills are critical and essential. But back to her point, being able to have honest conversations is the foundation of a loving and healthy relationship. I have some really good friends in life, some female friends that I have had for 20, 30 years, and we are able to have these conversations. And we are able to say difficult things to one another because we love each other, because we want the best for each other, because we don't want to hurt each other, because we don't want to let our friends hurt us, and because we don't want to hurt them. And we can hurt them not knowing it. But we are willing to be honest and say, I know you said this to me out of love, but it really hurt. And we are able and willing to hear that from one another. That takes a maturity. It takes a willingness. It takes a belief in self. So one of the books that I read early on in my recovery process was Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Amazing book. I had heard about this book for years and years and years, and I thought, oh my God, how great can it be? Well, then I read it, and I tell you, every single page of that book, I learned something at that time in my life. And then Laura Preston told me about this book by Melissa Urban, The Book of Boundaries, Set the Limits That Will Set You Free. And I'm going to go to that book now and share with you some of the conversations that she recommends for people in terms of how to set boundaries specifically around food. These conversations can be extrapolated and used in many other areas of life, but because if you're new in the post-op life, or you've recently lost a lot of weight, or you're changing your lifestyle in general, you may have family members who mean well, but are really being inappropriate, and you're uncomfortable. And one of the things that Melissa Urban says in this book is, she says, here's the cold, hard truth. And she says, born from more than a dozen years of helping people identify and create their own personalized, sustainable diets, often the people closest to you are the most likely to disrespect your boundaries around food and drink. So let's face it, the people you are around the most, the people who criticized your weight and your food and your body size and your shape and what you ate and how much you ate or how much you didn't eat, are the people closest to you. And after you change your lifestyle, after you lose a lot of weight, these are the people who are going to be coming at you, right? And having those same conversations with you. So here are some ways that she talks about to help people. And she goes about this in using a green light, yellow light, red light boundary setting. And you can copy these. You can use them verbatim. You can take what she has as an outline and use them. But I'm going to give you different scenarios that you've probably come across in your changing of lifestyle. And you can tweak these to fit your situation. But I want to read to you a paragraph. She says, the good news is that by establishing these healthy boundaries around your diet and your body, and I'm not going to say diet like I'm on a diet, but the way you eat, your eating method. And as if you had bariatric surgery, you eat like a post-op. If you're taking GLP-1s, however you are choosing to lose weight or maintain weight, you have a prescriptive eating method. You have a way that you eat. So that's what I mean by your diet. So the good news is that when you establish these healthy boundaries around your diet and your body, you're both preserving your mental health. It'll reduce anxiety. Setting these boundaries will help you stay clear and focused on what you want and your mindset, she says, and changing the culture that surrounds you. So in other words, you're going to teach people how to treat you, which is a Dr. Phil thing. We teach people how to treat us. And the way we teach them is by what we let them get away with. So it's a you issue. It is not a them issue. Yes, they have a part in it, and that is their issue. But for purposes of this conversation, your boundary setting is your issue. It is not about them. It is not about whether they respond or react or respect what you're asking of them. It's about you setting the boundary. Remember, we don't have control over what other people do, say, how they respond. We do have 100% control over what we say if we're honest, if we're dishonest. So in this book, the Book of Boundaries, she says it's worthwhile to learn how to confidently say no to something that doesn't serve you without offering any excuses. So you don't need to make excuses for yourself. You just need to learn to say no. No, I will not do that. No, I am not going to apologize for my healthy eating. No, I am not giving in to your desire for me to eat with you. She says, without offering any excuses or reasons whatsoever. And applicable to alcohol. So whether it's food or alcohol, you can use the examples she shows in this book. And she says, breaking the cycle begins with you. And it's the same thing as saying, nobody's coming. Nobody's coming to do this for you. So she says, here are some things you can do to help break the diet culture curse. She says, don't talk about food over food. So the time to talk about these boundaries is not while you are eating. It's when you are in a different setting. So before the dinner, before you go to their house, we'll get into some specifics. And don't talk about other people's food choices. It's like, well, you do this and you do that. It's okay for you to set boundaries. None of your business. If you have a fear or a concern about the way somebody's eating, you know what it's like to have somebody sit there while you're at a dinner and say, do you really need to eat that? Do you really need to take that second helping? That is not the time or the place. If I'm concerned about your weight affecting your health, I'm going to have that conversation with you at another time in another place. And I'm going to keep it about me, not about you. I'm concerned. I'm worried. I'm not going to hammer you with this or say anything to you about it again, but I need to be honest about how I'm feeling. All right. Don't talk about your body or anybody else's. So you don't get to play hypocrite. You don't get to say, don't talk about my body, but then do it about other people's. All right. So this stuff has to go both ways. You got to walk the walk and talk the talk. Don't do things that reinforce the diet culture, and do lead by example, and especially around children and teens. So she says, let's do some examples. Let me get to some examples here. So she has in this book, and she calls it Scripts for Setting Boundaries Around Food. So setting and holding boundaries around food helps you to feel your best, right? I'm telling you what's important to me. I'm telling you what I will allow and what I will not allow. That's very empowering, makes me feel proud of myself. I am worth the effort. I am worth setting this boundary for? I am a healthy person. I am sharing with you what my limit is. Now, there are a lot of challenges here, and here are some examples that you may be able to relate to. And I'm going to give you 3 different responses: her softest boundary, a little firmer boundary, and then her most firm boundary. She says an example is this woman who's limiting the sugar intake and feels a whole lot better. But her mom is having a birthday, and her mom is going to pressure her to have a piece of cake, and so the question is, how do I explain this? And the green light, the boundary that's the softest, is no thanks. Pure, simple, no thank you. All right? If that doesn't work and they come back at you, it's like, if they say, come on, just have a little bit, just one bite. Nope, I don't want any cake today, but thank you. A little firmer, right? First it's no thanks. No, I don't want any cake today. Thank you. If you got to go in a little stronger, so we did the green light, the yellow light, now here's the red light. Okay, you can stop asking, I'm not eating cake. Change the subject or leave the room. Gasp. You say, I could never do that. Yes, you could. Yes, you could. You need to work through the reasons why you think you can't with your therapist and practice it with your therapist and then do it. Green light, no thanks. Yellow light, no thanks. I don't want any cake today. Red light, okay, you can stop asking. I'm not eating cake. Vamonos, get out of there. She says, you can do this. She said you can sub cake with the break room donuts or the wine at the book club or any other food or drink you don't want to partake in. She says the important thing to note is that you don't have to explain it. Just decline. She says if you're pressed, you could also add, I don't need cake to enjoy the party. I don't need wine to enjoy the party. Or I'm not going to feel good if I eat cake. And feeling good is important to me. It's just a way to reinforce what's important. And she says this is where you learn that no is a complete sentence. No, thank you. No, thank you. And in her book, she says you're going to hear a lot of iterations of no, thank you, which could be, I'm not feeling it tonight. I just don't want any. So she says the beauty here is that nobody can really argue with your taste buds. If you're not in the mood for cake, you're not in the mood for cake. If you're not in the mood for having a glass of wine, you're not in the mood for a glass of wine. Nobody should be able to pressure you. You should be able to say no, thank you. All right, let's go with this one. Let's say you're gluten-free, or let's say you are not partaking in a lot of heavy carbs, or you're eating your protein first, you're going light on the carbs, or maybe you are need to eat gluten-free because you're intolerant. So the example she gives in the book is, the in-laws are inviting us to dinner, but they, every time we go, it's pasta. And then to be nice, I always eat the pasta, and then I feel like crap. So the green light, she says, encourage your spouse, because it's his parents, or if it's your parents, for you to say, thank you for the invite. If you're making pasta, could you please get the gluten-free kind? Or, if it's, I'm not eating a lot of pasta, if you're going to have pasta, could you have a nice source of protein? Or I'm willing to bring, some grilled chicken to go with that. All right, so there's that. That's the green light one. And if they're like, no, we're just going to have the pasta, and I'm just going to make the kind I usually make. Well, so if it's your spouse, we'd love to come, but only if the meal's gluten-free because my wife so-and-so, because I want her to enjoy it too. Or to say that to your parents. Well, I'd love to come, but I'm only going to come if either you're going to provide or I can bring the source of protein, because to me it's important to eat that first. So you got to stand up for yourself here. And if they still give you flack, her red response is, no thanks. You know, I'm not eating a lot of that right now. And if you're not willing to make accommodations, I'm not going to come, but you're willing to come to our house and I'll make dinner. So, no, no. I said no. So it's green light, yellow light, red light. So it's a little bit more intense. So here's another example. So let's say you come from the clean your plate club family and you're no longer eating big portion sizes. You're willing to leave some food on the plate. But let's say your family member guilts you about that. You know, they go on about the starving children or how much money they spend on groceries. And so her suggestion is, could you please just give me a very small serving? I'm not sure if I'll be able to eat it all. I can always take more. So that's the easy one. The next more intense one is, you know what, I don't like wasting food either, but I also don't like eating until I feel sick. So I can put it in the fridge for you, or I'm happy to take it home with me. So again, you're saying, no, I'm not eating it all. I don't want to waste it. I don't want to throw it away either. But if you're going to give it to me, I'm still not going to eat it all. You can put it back, or I will take some with me. Hardcore. I'm finished. Clear your plate. Store any leftovers. It's not a debate. You are standing up for yourself. You can feel good about that. And we're not going to get into why do people do that, or here's what I want to really encourage you to stay away from. Stay away from making up stories about what other people are doing, why they're saying it, why they're doing it, why they want you to do this, or why they. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You might be right, you might be wrong, but I'll tell you, you're not a mind reader. You are not a mind reader. You can say, help me understand what's important to you about this, but you're not a mind reader, so you don't get to make things up because you're probably going to be wrong. I'm going to tell you an example of this. It's not necessarily related to boundaries. Well, it is actually. I had a person telling me recently that they were going to go visit a sibling because they're very close to the sibling's very young child. And they just have a bond, aunt, niece. And that's a very fun thing. And so the aunt was willing to go to the other town where they live. And she could sense that the sister had some reservations. Now, the aunt plays games with the niece online. So they interact a lot. They have a really good relationship. But the woman could tell that the sister was a little bit reluctant about wanting her to come, but was kind of using excuses. And so she said to her, it doesn't seem like you really want me to come. And the sister was like, well, there are a lot of stairs, and I know those are really difficult for you because of your weight, and I don't want my daughter to be worried about you, and blah, 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 blah. So this was very hurtful to the woman I was talking to, rightly so, right? It hurt. That part I fully supported. What I worked on with the person from the psychological level is the person said, so she's telling me I'm not good enough to come to her house. She's punishing me. And I was like, whoa, where did that come from? Because that's not at all what your sister said. So we had to process that. And as it turned out, this was coming from, as is often the case, when she was a child, her parent was very critical of her weight. Her parent would make comments about her weight, and the resulting child feeling, which of course is going to be the child feeling coming from a parent. Children want their parents to love and accept and appreciate them. So the child felt, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And the same parent bought the sister a vehicle at the age of 16. And when this person asked when she was going to get her vehicle, the answer was, when you lose weight. So she felt punished by the parent because of her weight. So it made perfect sense to me in a therapeutic standpoint, from a therapeutic standpoint, that she would automatically think that that's what her sister was saying because she was internalized these messages. She had internalized these messages from her parent. You're not good enough, and I'm going to punish you. But that is not what her sister was saying. So that's what you do in therapy. You work through the issue. It's like, makes sense that you would think that given what you experienced as a child. As an adult, it's not okay to overlay your parental issues, your issues with your parent onto your sister because your sister did not say that. Did it hurt that your sister didn't want you to come? Yes. Yes, absolutely. I feel with you. I feel for you. But did your sister say those things? No, she didn't. So we have to be careful because a lot of times we are going to we are going to interpret things people say or do from things from our past, from messages that are running around in our head. And that's why the communication is often difficult because we may be hearing things other people aren't saying. And when we set boundaries with people, they may do the same. They're hearing things you're not saying. Well, you don't love me. You don't love me if you won't eat my whatever. That's not what you're saying. What you're doing is setting a healthy boundary. So the reason relationships are so difficult, we all act like 8-year-olds, is because you're responding to something that's going on in your head that I didn't really say. And then you're responding to me, and I'm reacting to you from something you didn't really say, but I am reacting to because it was part of my childhood issues and your childhood issues are clashing. And unless we sort through those things in therapy, it's going to be real hard for us to have a healthy adult relationship, right? All right. So let's see. Here's some other ones, some other examples. If your person or your family or your spouse or your friend isn't supportive of the choices you've made to lose weight, or if they don't support you taking a GLP-1, or if they don't support you having bariatric surgery, and they're making snide remarks about what you will eat or you won't eat. So her response is, if they're just getting nasty with you and they're being passive aggressive or commenting about what you eat, how do you comment? She says, the nice boundary is to say, I respect your decisions about what you eat, and I expect the same tolerance from you. You don't have to agree with my choice, but please don't make it a subject of conversation. Right? So I'm cutting this line of conversation off. Please don't make this a topic of conversation. I'm not willing to talk about that. Now, they keep at it. So your next higher level of boundary is, let's really not talk about our food choices. And especially if you're eating, let's not talk about our food choices while we're eating, and then change the subject. And if they come back at it again, say, listen, you know what? I want to spend time with you, but I'm only going to spend time with you if we table this conversation. This is not a subject I am willing to discuss. It is off the table. Will that work for you? So you're laying it out there. You don't have to be nasty. And some people, I think, fear boundaries because they think, I've got to push my agenda. No, you don't. No, you don't. You have to say, this is uncomfortable for me. I am not willing to discuss this with you. I know you care about me. Those foods don't make me feel good. So if they're pushing foods on you, or, you know what, those foods are no longer appealing to me. Those foods no longer agree with me. I am paying attention to what I'm eating, and my health has never been better. Please stop making comments like that. It's not helpful. You're not my doctor. Taking it up a notch further. Listen, I'm going to trust myself to make the right decisions for my health along with my doctor. And if you can't respect that, I'm going to have to stop spending time with you for the time being. So, in other words, you're saying, listen, if you're not respecting my nice request, I'm going to amp it up a little bit, because boundaries are for what? To protect me. To protect me from not having you guilt me into eating things I don't want to eat. To protect me from having you push your agenda on me, whatever it is. I'm not going to make an assumption about what it is, but you're coming at me for some reason, and I'm not going to participate to make you feel better, to please you, to think you're going to like me if I give in. I'm not willing to put my health and my mental health and my anxiety and my guilt and my depression and my whatever on the line to make you happy. I have to set boundaries for me like I would my child, to keep them safe, to keep my mental health safe, to boost my self-esteem. That's what boundaries are about. And it's the same with alcohol. I'll give you a real quick example. This is going long, so I'm going to wrap it up. But I don't drink, haven't drank for a long time. I'll give you two recent examples. I've already shared one in a recent podcast, I think, when I was at the hotel and had a bad day, and this young man in housekeeping was helping me, and he brought me a bottle of wine to my room. I just accepted it and said, thank you. And then I gave the wine to my daughter to take to her book club. We were at a restaurant, my husband and I, and we were in Italy, I think it was, and we were sitting outside, and the owner, their culture is different, and so they brought us shots of alcohol. They were being so kind and generous and gracious, like your host might be. And you may have to say no to your host to a food or an alcoholic beverage or whatever, and you might hurt their feelings. But sorry, I'm not going to ruin my sobriety so your feelings aren't hurt. And so this guy gives us these shots, and we're like, no, thank you. No, thank you. We don't drink. And language barrier too here. And he sets him down in front of us and stands there with his hands on his hips, well, drink up. And I'm like, no, I do not drink. So we walked away, and we gave our shots to the people at the next table. They're like, hey, we'll take them. We're like, sure, here you go. And he just glared at us. So to him, we were being very, very rude. To your mother, to your mother-in-law, to your coworker, to your spouse, to your whomever, you may be seeming very, very rude by not accepting their gift of food or by not eating their whatever. Sorry. I am not willing to risk my health so you don't feel hurt. I'm going to be kind. I'm going to be pleasant. I'm going to be firm. I am going to be fair. So I would really encourage you to do two things to wrap this up. I'm going to encourage you to work with a therapist to find out what is the deal that makes setting boundaries, that standing up for yourself, that having enough value for your own boundaries is so difficult for you. Now, I get it. I understand. I get it. But it's still a skill you need to learn if you're going to live the life that you want. And so I want you to work with your therapist to learn what's going on and to learn the skills of how to do this. And then I really want you to get this book by Melissa Urban. And again, it'll be in the show notes, called The Book of Boundaries. Set the limits that will set you free. And look at her amazing examples. And the entire book, she does this. She gives you a green light. Here's a nice, easy way to approach it. Here's a little firmer way. And then here's a more hardcore way. And some of them are really cute and funny. But this is something that you got to learn, friends, if you're gonna succeed in maintaining your weight. You're going to have to learn to set boundaries with people, because they will want to push food on you. I would also encourage you to go listen to Susan Mitchell's episode about food pushers on her podcast called Bariatric Surgery Success. And I thank you for spending this long amount of time with me. I'm just winging it, not feeling good. You wouldn't know it because blah, 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 blah. Don't give me a mic. Thanks. If you have topics you would like to hear about, or if you have any feedback about this episode, please send me your comments. I appreciate them so very much. And I will be with you again next week. And we'll be talking about something else that will hopefully help you on your journey to creating the life that you want to live. All right, my friends, we're talking about your life, your health. It's your responsibility this day and every day. Make the best of it. Bye-bye.